As a psychiatrist, I love the brain. The central nervous system is such a fascinating and complex piece of equipment. It monitors all of our activities and surroundings. It allows us to think, to remember, to feel, to plan, to dream. It allows us to move in space. It's a wonder. But in addition to our central nervous system, the part that's under conscious control, we also have what we call the autonomic nervous system. It's a part of our nervous system that operates mostly under conscious awareness. But it's so helpful in preparing us and allowing us to live life well. Many of you have heard of the flight and fight response. This is part of the autonomic nervous system that we call the sympathetic response. When we are faced with a challenge or a threat, when we sense danger or need to move into action, our sympathetic nervous system kicks into high gear. It pumps epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol and other hormones into the system to wake us up and prepare us for action. It dilates our eyes, sends blood to our arms and legs, gets us ready to fight or to flee, to engage in the challenge or to run away from danger. It's fantastically helpful. Unfortunately, our autonomic nervous system, that sympathetic response, can kick in at inappropriate times. And when we live in times of stress, where we feel constantly threatened, we can be overrun by that sympathetic response, and it can do damage to our health and our vitality. In contrast to the sympathetic response is a counteractive response called the parasympathetic response. It is, rather than being our fight and flight, it's more our rest and digest response. It allows us to feel calm and settled. It allows us to feel at peace. It sends blood from our limbs back to our core so that we can digest our food or eliminate when we need to clean our bowels out. It's also active when we are engaged in intimate sexual activity. So some people call it the feed and breed response. But it's a beautiful thing because it allows us to be fully present, to be at rest, to be peaceful and have a sense of well-being. It's a great thing. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have control over which branch of our autonomic system is engaged. And when one engages, if the sympathetic kicks in, the parasympathetic kicks out, and vice versa. Now, there's one thing we can do to help move us from that stress response to that relaxation response. I call it the surrender response. It's when we lift our arms heavenward. What happens is that blood flows from our arms to our core. It helps engage that parasympathetic response that slows down our heart rate and our breathing, allows us to feel calmer and more at rest. There's a good reason why the criminals or the law officers would tell people to come out with your hands up. When you raise your hands, it keeps you from engaging that fight or flight response, makes you safer, but it also allows you to be less of a threat. The surrender response is what we can engage when we need to move from high stress to low stress. I'm a big fan of worship, and I love lifting my hands in worship as a sign of my surrender to God. I also love what's called the serenity prayer. It says this: God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, to have the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It goes on and says, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, enduring hardship as the path to peace. Taking this world as it is, as Jesus did, not as I would have it, trusting that if I surrender to your will, you'll make all things right, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Surrendering to God is a powerful thing. Now, if we're faced with a threat that we need to engage, we need our sympathetic nervous system to kick in and prepare us for action. But there are many things we cannot change, and we need to engage the surrender response. We need to have the serenity to accept things we cannot change, to put things on the altar, as it were, to put them in God's care and control, knowing that there are many things that affect us that we are powerless to change, but that we can entrust to a mighty God. Today, if you find yourself stressed and distressed, your heart racing, your blood pressure rising, feeling frustration, anger, or anxiety, take a moment and deliberately choose to surrender. Maybe even raise your hands heavenward, surrendering figuratively and practically to God, who is able to take control of those things we release to His care. My prayer for you today is that you would live in that place of surrender, being willing to ask God to give you that serenity to accept things you cannot change, courage to change things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference.